Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would give my little UFC fight card review, at least that of the main event. And I do apologize for not posting more videos as of lately, but of course, still been a little bit busy, figuring out certain work and other stuff like that. But once again, I have a lot of projects that I do plan to eventually release. I just do not know exactly when I'm going to release them. But I am going to be trying new editing software very, very soon. So more than likely, overall, I will be posting them at least sometime within the next couple of months. Hopefully, very, very soon and sooner than that. But I'm just not quite sure because my schedule is just, very, very loose right now and very chaotic in terms of, what I really have time for. But that being stated, overall, of course, this was the beginning of the great fight weekends, this month, because of course you have this great UFC card. And then of course next week we have Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopez in that of the rematch. And of course we also have the humongous boxing fight between that of a Teofimo Lopez versus Shakur Stevenson, which I 100% will for sure be commenting on because that is a humongous fight. But that being stated, of course, how can I not talk about that of the main event of the UFC fight card tonight, between that of Justin the highlight reel Gaethje and also that of Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. And of course, for those of you that did not end up seeing the fight, Justin Gaethje ended up winning this fight, and I think that he pretty much won this fight besides that of round 3, pretty much within that of a shutout. Now, of course, certain people may have a different definition of a shutout. To me, what a shutout is that you win, at least about probably around 85% of the fight, which is pretty much what Justin Gaethje ended up doing. Justin Gaethje overall, other than that of round 3, I thought that he clearly won every other round. And I must say, overall, good on Mr. Justin Gaethje because I did predict that Paddy Pimblett was going to win this fight. Now, do I believe that Paddy Pimblett, do I believe that he's someone that is a better or a more skilled fighter than Justin Gaethje at both of their best? Absolutely not. But Justin Gaethje is someone that has taken a lot of damage. He seemed a little bit less motivated or a little bit less in his mindset within this fight coming into the press conference for me. And he's someone that definitely you can see has slowed down a little bit in his past couple of fights. Not just overall against, Rafael Fiziev, or Rafael Fiziev, however you want to pronounce his name, in his last fight, but of course, in some other fights as well. Max Holloway, of course, was probably one of his worst performances, partially because of Max's great performance, but also because I think that Justin Gaethje kind of, inducted in, the wrong type of tactics in order to beat that of a Max Holloway. But the point is that, Justin Gaethje is definitely not getting any younger. And Justin Gaethje is someone that, more than likely, unfortunately, because he's just taken so much punishment, he probably is going to have a little bit of problems a little bit later on. So I hope for him. And also another fighter that also took a lot of damage, Mr. Dustin Poirier. I hope overall that both of those fighters that they find the right therapy or, overall the right doctors in order to actually heal themselves so they don't end up, with the punch drunk syndrome. But that being stated, overall, Justin Gaethje, I did think that he was going to lose this fight, not necessarily because I thought that Paddy was more skilled than him, but because Paddy was the young lion heading into this fight. He was the bigger fighter between the two. I've always stated that Paddy, in my view, was very big for that weight class, and really probably, just in my personal view, should probably be fighting at around 170 pounds, really instead of 155. But right now, as you can still see, Paddy is still a little bit raw in his skill set. He's someone overall that still has a lot of holes in his game. And Justin Gaethje was able to expose a certain amount of those holes. Now, am I, quote unquote, shocked by this result? No, I'm not. I did predict Paddy to win because I thought Gaethje was going to win, maybe a round, maybe two. But I thought eventually that Paddy was going to catch Gaethje and eventually end up knocking him out. I thought Gaethje would be slower in this fight, which he was. And I thought Gaethje overall would not be quite the same fighter in this fight that he was prior in his other fights, which also was correct. But Gaethje overall, once again, you have to hand credit to him. He was overall, once again, able to pretty much expose all of the holes in Paddy Pimblett's game. And one thing I also have to give Gaethje credit for is this. He finally did something in this fight that I have never seen him do in another fight in his career, which is actually take it to the ground, which was a very smart tactic. But, Justin Gaethje, I'm sure, realizes that this is the last chapter, which he has already stated multiple times. This is pretty much going to be his final title run, and I do believe that Dana White, that he is going to give Justin Gaethje that of the title shot against that of Ilia Topuria next because he pretty much has earned it. And that is a fight that a lot of people are going to want to see. And we'll talk about that, next. But that being stated overall, Paddy Pimblett, the question is about Mr. Paddy is that was he quote unquote exposed as that of a hype job? Well, I'm not, going to just 100% jump on that bandwagon as of yet to claim that the man is just a complete utter hype job as of yet, but it also does depend on what your definition of a hype job is. Because hype jobs overall can kind of go by levels. You can have A grade level hype jobs, you can have B grade level hype jobs, you can have C grade level hype jobs. Because in my personal view, when you talk about, hype jobs overall, people that never lived up to the hype within that of sports or within that of boxing, for example, in my personal view, to a certain degree, Victor Ortiz was a hype job. Now, he ended up, of course, winning a belt eventually over that of an Andre Berto, and he was a legitimate champion with legitimate talent. But he still was someone that you could very much tell connected overall with a certain amount of the Latino fan base and a certain amount of the other mainstream media fans. So the point is that, I believe that Bob Arum and a certain amount of those guys, that they were trying to really, really promote that of a Victor Ortiz, but he never really lived up to the potential that they thought that he could live up to. Paddy Pimblett kind of reminds me of that. And it's very obvious that Dana White, that, he's kind of looking for someone to be the next Conor McGregor. He's looking for kind of that same archetype. But I don't think overall that he's really going to find the next Conor McGregor, just to my personal view, because I think that he's more than likely going to have to try to go with that of a different archetype, or that of a different type. But, we'll see what ends up happening because, of course, a lot of the same roles that were played in prior generations, they're still played overall within these generations. They pretty much just replaced roles. It's almost like having a show or a series, but every different, season is a series of different actors, almost kind of like that of a Doctor Who, for those of you that have watched that show. But that being stated overall, the point being is that Dana White is very obviously probably not happy about this result. I think that it was very obvious that he wanted Paddy Pimblett, his new rising, bright, shining star, to pull out of this fight. But Paddy Pimblett showed that, that he was not ready. And to be quite honest with you, I'm not really quite sure if Paddy Pimblett is ever going to be ready to really meet the best of the best fighters. Now, I think that Paddy Pimblett, that he pretty much had showed up at the right time within this weight class, because if we're really going to be honest about it, how many of these fighters are really in their prime anymore? Charles Oliveira, pretty much all of his prime, if he had any prime left, was pretty much sucked out of him after that last Ilia Topuria performance. Justin Gaethje has been, stopped, I believe, a couple of occasions, over within that of the past few years, or, at least once by that of Max Holloway, and he suffered so much damage because he's been through so many wars. Tony Ferguson, of course, has, been on the downside for I don't know how many years now. When you talk about, that weight class, it's not quite as strong as what it once was. Once upon a time, you had that weight class. You had peak Dustin Poirier. You had peak Justin Gaethje. You had that of Eddie Alvarez. You had Conor McGregor that was still around there. You had a Abir Nurmagomedov, an up-and-coming Islam Makhachev, and a lot of other guys there. But Paddy Pimblett, when we take a look at his rise, to the top 5, it's very clear that it was someone orchestrated. It is what it is. And there are certain fighters that, overall, that certain guys like Dana White or promoters, they make sure that they have more favorable matchups because they really want them to be big, shining, bright stars. And I remember overall when Conor McGregor, all the way back, within that of the mid-2010s, a lot of people were saying that Conor McGregor was this hype job and that he was someone overall that Dana White, he was really trying to push him. Dana White definitely was someone trying to push him, but Conor McGregor did have a certain amount of matchups overall that definitely would be tough for him, at least when he was on the come up. At 145, he had to face a very tough Dustin Poirier and also a Max Holloway. Now, were they at the peak versions of themselves when Conor McGregor fought them? No, not necessarily. But they still overall were top 10 and top 15 contenders when Conor McGregor had fought them, and he pretty much had handled them with ease, or at least handled Dustin Poirier with that of ease. Then, of course, he would fight Chad Mendes. He would eventually, of course, although Chad Mendes was on short notice, he would knock him out, and then, of course, he would knock out at the time, because John Jones was suspended, he would knock out Jose Aldo within that of 13 seconds. Then, of course, he went to 155 and beat that of an Eddie Alvarez and won the title there. But that being stated, Dana White, of course, is still looking for that next Conor McGregor star. He looked for it, somewhat in Sugar Sean O'Malley. And, of course, his next bright, shining star was with that of a Paddy Pimblett. But I don't think that either Paddy nor that of a Sugar Sean O'Malley, I don't think that they were ever the skilled fighter of that of a Conor McGregor. Now, do they have the charisma? Yes, they do. But Conor McGregor, when you take a look at him at his absolute peak, in terms of his all-around skills? Is he someone that I would claim is the greatest fighter of all time? No, I'm not going to claim that. But he certainly is one of the greatest fighters that I've seen, especially of that era. And on top of that, at one point in time, Conor McGregor was running through a certain amount of the opposition. Is he someone without holes in his game? No, of course not. He has holes. But that being stated, Paddy Pimblett, just in my personal view, I don't know if he is ever going to be the fighter of what a Conor McGregor was. And when you take a look at Paddy Pimblett within this fight, I mean, the same errors have pretty much been there for the past several years every time that I have seen him. He has relied on a lot of guile and a lot of heart and a lot of toughness in order to win his fights. And to be quite honest with you, if he is ever going to even possibly become a champion, he's going to have to work overall on certain skill sets because his offense is very, very sloppy. His chin is wide open in the air. Almost every punch that he throws is very advertised and sometimes slapped. He punches very hard, and he's someone that, does have somewhat of technique, but it's very, very sloppy. It's not sharp, it's not precise, and it's not straight the same way that a Conor McGregor does it. So, I mean, it just is what it is, or did do it, of course, because Conor McGregor, of course, now has not fought within that of several years. But Paddy, just in my personal view, was he explosive in this fight? Yes, he majorly was. Now, of course, for any of us that have been watching Paddy for, a certain amount of years, we know that pretty much the same faults have always reared their ugly head. But the point was, or the question was, is that would an older Justin Gaethje, some would even say a quote-unquote washed-up Justin Gaethje, would he be able to beat that of a Paddy Pimblett, who, of course, was very big, someone who still is very talented, very tough, and very powerful? Would Gaethje be able to defeat him? Well, it's obvious that Gaethje was not as washed up as what a lot of us or a lot of people thought about him. I thought that he would be in worse condition. And to be quite honest with you, this, of course, did not look anything like that of a Pete Gaethje. We barely seen any leg kicks throughout this fight until that really of the final couple of rounds. He was someone that looked tired. He looked sluggish. He looked a lot slower than what he used to be. This was a Gaethje that, to be quite honest with you, probably was about 75% of what he was, overall about a few years ago, and he still was pretty much able to dominate that of a Paddy Pimblett. And it's going to be a little bit damaging to his career because I'm not quite sure how he, at least immediately, is really going to be able to bounce back from this. And when you take a look at his rise to the title occasion, there's no offense to Paddy Pimblett, but he pretty much got a gift decision over that one guy, Jared Anderson, or, Jared, whatever the hell his name was. That shorter bald dude, with the thick eyebrows, he pretty much got a gift decision over him, overall, because Dana White did not want another Sugar Sean Chito Vera situation, overall, pretty much, losing to that of somewhat of an unknown fighter. It would have really killed a lot of the hype. Then, of course, he ends up fighting a washed-up Tony Ferguson. We pretty much all knew that Tony was not going to be able to win that fight. Then, of course, later on, he fights out of a Bobby Green, I believe. Bobby Green has been someone that, for any of us who have been watching UFC for a very long time, he's a good C-grade level fighter. Like, in terms of boxing terms, he's very similar to that of a Luis Collazo. He can give you a tough fight, especially, if you're not someone that is the elite of the elite. But if you're the elite of the elite or top 10 or a truly top 5 contender, you're going to beat that of a Bobby Green. And that's why Paddy Pimblett was able to get him. Then he was able to face a Michael Chandler, someone who has always had an extraordinarily level, low-level IQ. I mean, it is what it is. And that was a Michael Chandler that, to be quite honest with you, did not really look like the same type of fighter, and who obviously had a massive size disadvantage. So this fight was very big for Paddy's career because this really was supposed to lead up to that super fight between that of Ilia Topuria and Paddy Pimblett, where Dana White, I have no doubt about it in my mind, wanted to kind of sell that fight as Conor McGregor versus Jose Aldo kind of part 2, just in the next generation. The up-and-coming charismatic European guy, overall against, that of the dominant, smaller champion. So, I mean, it would have been a fantastic fight, but of course, Justin Gaethje had that of other plans. He was the more technical fighter, even with that of his age and the wear and tear that he has suffered, and his striking, although Gaethje has never been necessarily a Dustin Poirier or a Conor McGregor in terms of his boxing ability. He's someone overall that has enough of striking ability overall to beat someone like that of a Paddy the Baddy. And I think Paddy is still very talented, and I will give him a lot of credit. He's someone that showed a lot of heart. He's someone overall that, I mean, as we can see here, took some hellified shots against Justin Gaethje, and that's one hell of a testament. That's one thing that he can at least say about himself, because anyone that knows Justin Gaethje, of course, knows that that man overall basically has rocks for fists. That man punches hard as a rock. And Khabib Nurmagomedov, I believe, who had been in the ring with Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor, and Justin Gaethje, as well as other fighters like Rafael dos Santos and other fighters like that, Khabib Nurmagomedov said that Justin Gaethje was the hardest hitter that he had ever been in the ring with. And he had been in the ring with some pretty hard hitters. So the fact that Paddy, even with Gaethje's advanced age, overall, even with that, the fact that he was able to take all those shots is great. But Paddy is not going to be able to do that for long. And it's not that, Paddy the Baddy, just in my personal view, he is going to have to make some major adjustments. And I just don't know if he's going to be able to make those adjustments. When you take a look at him, he's 31 years of age. It's not like he's 23 or 25 or 26 or something like that. He is already in his early 30s. The title shot was pretty much set up for him, and he pretty much got completely dominated in this fight. So what is next for that of Paddy the Baddy? I'm not really quite sure. I believe that Dana White will, of course, probably put him, in another, very favorable matchup, because I think that he still has a lot of use for Paddy the Baddy. He still is one of the most popular fighters within that of the world, and not just within that of the UFC. A lot of people, including boxing fans, but a lot of sports fans in general, know who Paddy the Baddy is. They understand that he brings a lot of charisma, and a lot of people, they pretty much connotate him with that of the Conor McGregor type of charisma or the type of character. So, I mean, it is what it is. We'll see what ends up happening there. Who do I think that he should possibly face next? I'm not really quite sure who he's going to face next, but I would like to see him maybe face someone like that of a Benny Dariush, or maybe that of a Dan Hooker, maybe one of those guys right there. I'm not really quite sure. But even that might be a little bit too high, because, to be quite honest with you, we still don't know how good Paddy the Baddy actually is. When he finally got in a real big fight against Justin Gaethje, a fight that was more 50-50, and a fight that, to be honest with you, with his age and his size, he was really supposed to win this fight, and he pretty much got his ass kicked. I don't really know how Paddy the Baddy is going to look within that of his next fights, especially if he actually faces someone that's going to be legitimately dangerous. If he faces someone like that of a Max Holloway, although I've always thought that Holloway was a bit overrated, Holloway is on the all-time great level in terms of an all-time great level fighter, and Paddy the Baddy is not that type of guy. He's someone that is talented, but he's very wild in his skill set. He's very advertised with his striking. He's very good on the ground, but he is not exceptional in my personal view. Not the way that a Charles Oliveira or an Islam Makhachev would be, just in my personal view, or even an Ilia Topuria, And unfortunately, for Dana, he's going to be very pissed at this result because, and I'm sure that he's glad that the event was a great fight, because this was a great fight. But by no means did Dana White want this fight to go Justin Gaethje's way. He for sure wanted to set this fight up for an Ilia Topuria versus Paddy Pimblett showdown. But of course, the script does not always go according to plan. But that being stated, that pretty much is about it for that. Good luck to Mr. Paddy Pimblett, and we'll see where he goes. As for Justin Gaethje, what do I believe is next for him? I believe, of course, that the next fight for him is going to be that of the Ilia Topuria fight. I think Dana White will have no problem setting up that fight. He is now the interim title contender. It would be a great look for Ilia to beat up or knock out the man that just ended up beating that of Paddy Pimblett and ended up beating him up, overall. And, of course, it would be another legend on his resume, because Ilia, of course, already has Volkanovski. He already has Max Holloway. And, of course, now he has Charles Oliveira. So if he was able to add Justin Gaethje, that would look even better for his career, even though it's probably not a Justin Gaethje that is at peak form, but still someone that is very clearly a top 5 within that weight class. So it's going to be very interesting. Now, do I believe that Justin Gaethje has a realistic chance to beat Ilia? Well, you can never count Justin Gaethje out, because he is a decently skilled fighter, even though he does take a lot of shots, and he's put his body on the line a little bit too much within his fights over his career. But, he does have a lot of power. He is someone that is skilled. But do I believe that he will beat Ilia? No, personally, I do not. Ilia is just someone that is way too skilled. He has probably, debatably, just as much power as Gaethje. Someone, especially for his size, the level of power that he has is absolutely astronomical. And when you talk about his skill set, the boxing, on top of that with the footwork, and also with that of the speed, and also the ground game, it's not even close. Ilia Topuria, in terms of a boxer, is probably the best boxing UFC fighter that I've ever personally seen in my life. And then on top of that, he's A+ on the ground with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, as well as a great wrestler. Ilia Topuria, to be quite honest with you, if he's able to get past that style of the Dagestanis, if he's actually able to get past the Arman Sarukians and, the Islam Makachevs, Ilia Topuria will have a very great case for being the greatest and the most skilled UFC or MMA fighter of all time. That's if he's able to do that. But we'll see overall what ends up happening there. But anyways, it will be very particularly interesting. Where does Paddy go from here? I'm not really quite sure, but a fight that I would love to see him in next is a fight against that of Dan Hooker. And he is going to have to try to get better from here. I do think that he is going to have to massively improve on the striking. His advertised strikes are not going to work against that of the elite. And I think that this pretty much was set up for him and gifted to him in order for him to get to that title shot, but he cannot do it. So was Paddy the Baddy somewhat exposed as a hype job? Somewhat, but I'm not going to claim that he's not a talented fighter. I do think that he is a talented fighter, but I also think that he has way too many holes in his game to become a champion at the current moment in time. He needs to have more head movement. He needs to have a little bit more diversity within his game. He also needs to learn, once again, not to advertise his strikes and also throw more straight. That's a lot of things that a lot of UFC fighters don't understand. A lot of MMA fighters don't understand. And that's why, I've had conversation with friends, for example, where they say that boxing is useless because UFC also teaches striking, right? But when you talk about hand-to-hand combat, there is no better hand-to-hand combat than that of boxing. It just is what it is. And people can like that, they can not like that. Now, does boxing, of course, always teach you the clinches, like what a Muay Thai does, or elbows, or spinning back fists? No, of course not. But when you talk about moving your head, when you talk about using jabs, using feints, overall clinching and tying up certain opponents, and on top of that, throwing straights and beating your opponent to the punch and countering people, and also setting up certain shots, there is no better hand-to-hand combat sport than that of boxing. It is what it is. Which is why you see certain guys overall like Ilia Topuria, overall, or Sugar Sean O'Malley or Conor McGregor, when they do have elite level boxing, or Anderson Silva, whatever it is, when they do have elite level boxing compared to their other contemporaries, as well as a great ground game, they pretty much blow their opponents out of the water. One thing I noticed about the Sean O'Malley versus that of, the Dong fight, I believe, or Song fight, excuse me, overall, was that, Song, I believe, was trying to beat O'Malley to the punch to a certain amount of times, but he was trying to constantly beat him with hooks. And one thing that a lot of the MMA fighters and the UFC fighters do not understand that they could benefit from boxing training is that a straight usually almost always beats that of a rounding punch or a circular punch. That's one thing that you're always taught within that of the basics of boxing, is that a straight always beats that of a curve. But a lot of these guys overall, once again, do not understand that. And Paddy, when we just talk about him, overall, his punches are just way too advertised, a little bit slappish. And on top of that, once again, just way too sloppy. But that being stated, congratulations to Mr. Justin Gaethje. Where will Paddy Pimblett go from here? I'm not really quite sure. I need to see him in fights to where he can actually gain his skill set and not just fight some of these washed up fighters or these low level contenders like that of a Bobby Green or a Tony Ferguson or a Michael Chandler. Now, the Michael Chandler win, I will say, especially with the way that he was able to do it, was somewhat impressive. But I would love to see him in the ring against guys like a Benio Dariush or a Benoit Saint Denis, or certain guys like that, Renato Moicano, if he's there. Those would be excellent, excellent fights. I would love to see those fights next. I would love to see him in one of those fights with Dan Hooker, but I'm not even sure if Dana White's going to put him in the ring with one of those guys, because Paddy isn't just any old regular fighter. He is someone that's very valuable. So you have to protect your assets. And I believe that Dana White will do that. I believe that, he'll have Paddy in a fight that probably at most is going to be somewhere around top 15, maybe at the bottom of the top 10. But I don't even believe that he's going to do that, because Paddy is someone that, overall, he needs to be protected at the current moment in time. So we'll see. But that being stated, that pretty much is about it. I do hope to see the Ilia Topuria versus Justin Gaethje fight. I do not believe that it will last for long, and I do believe that Topuria, more than likely, unless he gets caught or underestimates Gaethje, I do believe that he will make short work of him. But it will be very interesting to see how that fight goes. But that being stated, congratulations to Mr. Justin Gaethje for someone turning back the clock and getting, yet again, probably another title shot. So we'll see what happens. But that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.